welcome to ABA Inside Track, the podcast that's like reading in your car, but safer. I'm your host, Robert Perry Cruz, and with me as always are my fabulous co-hosts.
Hi, Rob. It's me, your friend, Jackie.
And it's me, Diana. I don't have to be your friend because I'm married to you.
I mean, I feel like that makes the marriage like go down easier. You're friends with your spouse, you know. You could try being enemies. I don't know if that's the best idea. This isn't a marriage counseling podcast. It's a podcast about behavior analysis and behavior analytic research, where every week we pick a topic and discuss related research articles, sometimes with the author of said articles joining us. And, you know, one of the things that I've always enjoyed about this podcast is sometimes we do it virtually. And I like to think of it almost like it's like a teleconsultation on discussing research. But, you know, when you get right down to it, there's a lot more to consultation than just saying, hi, I get paid a lot of money and I will now answer your questions. So we decided to really dig down into the nitty gritty of what might make consultation different, especially when done over the internet. So we brought an expert in the field to join us, that author of said articles, and that is Dr. Aaron Fischer, who's joining us today. Aaron, thank you so much for coming on the show.
It's my pleasure. Thanks so much for having me on.
I do sort of wish Dr. Fischer were here with like a robot form, though, and just a little iPad face.
Oh, I know. Diana was saying, I hope we're asking questions about the robots. That's what I want to know. And I'm like, I'm pretty sure I wrote a question that's literally, what about those robots?
Lots to talk about when it comes to robots, for sure.
All right. So Aaron is here to talk us through research he's been doing with his colleagues on teleconsultation. I think I called it virtual consultation when I sent out the invite. I don't know why. Teleconsultation sounds much more fancy and
You
less
said that
VR.
email from 1998.
I know. You put on your headset and you can VR consult. So Diana, what are the articles that we will be discussing today?
All right. We have 3 articles that will inform our conversation today. The first is titled A Comparison of Digital Observations of Students from Video Cameras and Aerial Drones. That's by King, Bloomfield, Fischer, Dart, and Radley, published in Journal of Educational and Psychological Consultation 2021. We'll also touch on Parent Teleconsultation to Increase Bytes Consumed, a demonstration across foods for a child with ARFID and ASD, by Bloomfield, Fischer, Dove, Clark, and Fife. That was in Behavior Analysis and Practice 2021. And then finally, to tie it all together, we'll discuss a systematic review of school teleconsultation, implications for research and practice, by King, Bloomfield, Wu, and Fischer. That was published in the School Psychology Review 2022.
Woohoo.
All recent publications.
I know.
Way to go. Yeah, we got a research team happening here. This is exciting.
We have a great team.
So Aaron, before we get into discussing the articles and discussing teleconsultation, could you please tell us a little bit about yourself and how you became interested in this topic specifically?
Yeah, I really appreciate that. I really love technology. I think I always have. I played video games growing up. So any chance I could get to kind of infuse that into my work, I was really looking for an outlet to do it. And really, you know, coming out here to the University of Utah, I've been here for 9 years. Our state is really, you know, different when you go from region to region, area to area, like many states, I think, across the country. And what I realized here was that there's such a need for these services for people to be able to help from a distance, because there's so many underserved communities. There's so many folks who would really benefit from behavior analytic services who just don't have access to the specialized providers. So a little bit about what got me into it was just seeing that there was this need. We talk about equity. We talk about giving access to people who need it the most. And I felt like technology was always sort of that way to bridge that gap. And so whether it be teleconsultation or some of the other fun stuff we'll talk about later, I think technology is here to stay. I think after the pandemic, we all agree teleconsultation will probably be here in some aspect of our practice. And I'm excited for that. But that really also says we have so much to figure out. And hopefully, you know, there's more than just our team and the few other folks who were kind of silly enough to do this years ago. There's some more people now who are interested in doing this work with us.
Excellent.
Nice.
So, Aaron, I have a question. It's not on the list, so I hope you are prepared because it's a tough one. Are you currently playing any video games or like way into any specific technology not related to teleconsultation these days?
Yes, very much so. We dove headfirst into virtual reality services and training. And so we're working through a simulation right now with our video games program here on campus, which will be available this year. And so we're really excited about that because that's going to take sort of all these ideas to the next level when it comes to technology and gaming. Currently, my 7-year-old wants to become a video game designer. So I'm hopeful that at some point we can loop that all back in and see where that goes.
Oh, that's very cool. That's very cool. It sounds like a really fun job. It sounds really tough though. It sounds like a really hard field to get into and then stay in and not get burnt out. But I guess when you're 7, you just see the good part.
Right.
That's okay. Yeah, we'll be flexible. Maybe, years from now, we'll see. But I'm optimistic.
Excellent. I know certainly for virtual reality, I think that is definitely a platform where I know everyone kind of plays video games these days on their phone, but I don't know a single person I haven't been like, check out this virtual reality game where you're like shooting space robots or like time slows down, where everyone is not just like blown away at just the presence component of things. So it's a very cool technology. So I'm excited to hear that you're collaborating and working on some stuff there. It's very cool.
Thank you. Yeah, I find the immersion that you can get, it's unbelievable. I want to do a study where you just observe people trying VR for the first time and just watch their reactions. And I think we're going to have some similar stuff happen. It's just so cool. And I particularly like to spend time just doing art. So there's like immersive art and like 3D design stuff that it's just, it's things you can only do in your brain, but now you can do it in like a medium. So yeah, very cool stuff. I don't know where that will go with research, but it's definitely fun to draw and mix things.
And it sounds more like a TikTok video of like people trying on VR headsets.
Do you guys remember when we were at the Thompson Center a couple years ago when they brought the virtual reality stuff to lunch?
Mm-hmm. I
and
do.
It was like Stranger Things first came out and they had like a Stranger Thing. Man, I could not do it.
If I remember correctly, Jackie, we were having lunch and you, like you said, and you like freaked out and made a lot of noise and possibly knocked something over.
Yeah, I knocked over my entire drink that was quite full because I had never done virtual reality before. So that would have been like key for you is I was like screaming in the restaurant because like monsters were coming out of the wall.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. The horror VR games are too much for me. I'm surprised that you started there. That's very brave. I had a client.
I hadn't even watched the show yet. They were just like, try it. It was my friends. I was like, sure.
Good luck. I had a high school client that I worked with, high school age client, and he was like, for one of the rewards that I really want you to do with me is this horror game. It's called Dread Halls. You like walk through and they come in and jump out at you. Mm. And I was like, yeah, I'm going to be brave. I can do this. I'm not a big fan of horror games in general, but I'll watch movies. And my face turned white. I'm like sweating profusely. I'm like, we have to get through this. This is really important to him. We did. And I think after that I had to sit down, but yeah, horror games, not so much.
No, this is the spooky season as we're recording this. And I always say like, I'm going to get back into horror games. And I'm always like, who's going to play with me? And no one will. And I'm like, well, just maybe next year. I'll try.
Just by yourself in the dark playing horror games. You're like, oh, why did I do this? Yeah.
No, it's no. I've got a list of like 5 to 10 games. I think I only finished because Diana wouldn't watch them, but was willing to stay in the room doing something else while I played them. Yeah. That was the only way I could get through. Just the knowledge that someone else was there.
Yeah, Diana, you played a really important role for those games.
That's right. Yeah. There's actually one portion of my dissertation that whenever I remember it, I remember that Rob was watching American Horror Story in the background, and the whole thing is tinted by that series of American Horror Story. When I look at it,
that's a dark one.
Visceral reaction. Yeah. But enough about me.
So, Aaron, when it comes to consultation, as you and your colleagues talked about in sort of the overview of consultation, there are lots of thoughts as to what makes good consultation. And I know, like, when I first started being a consultant, I was probably in my early mid-20s when people started asking me for advice on things, and being new to the field, I thought, well, consultation is, I'm really, really smart and I'll tell you some smart things and I'll use as many big words as I've got, and then you'll go off and be a better person for having known me. And as I've gotten older and done this for longer, I recognize that's not exactly, I don't know what the name of that branch of consultation is. Maybe it's worthless consultation, I'm not sure, but there's much more to consultation than just that. So would you mind kind of giving us, the elevator pitch on what goes into good consultation, or what are the styles of consultation?
Yeah, I think it's so important because I think people, especially folks who are right out of their training and maybe starting to practice, think exactly the same way you are. Like, hey, I have all this knowledge. I'm really highly trained. I read these books. I took these tests. I know these things. And, at the end of the day, when you're working with parents or you're working with educators or caregivers, they don't really care about what you know. They just want to feel like you see them and you support them. And so when it comes to, effective consultation, I think you bring up a really good point, which is this idea about being directive versus being more collaborative in consultation. And I think there's like a balance that we have to kind of have for both. I mean, we obviously don't want to sit back and just be like, yeah, you tell me everything to do and I'll just take your lead. Because as we know, that could be negligent. There could be really problematic stuff happening. And so we want to figure out a way, first and foremost, that we can form a strong and authentic relationship with the people that we want to serve. And the way to do that is to see them and to understand them and understand their experiences. And that's really important to successful consultation because people don't listen to people they don't like, that they don't appreciate, they don't feel affirmed by, because it's a lot to do something, right? Especially as adults. And so what was really interesting in my training when it came to consultation is, we're working so much to change the behavior of children, but really at the end of the day, we're really trying to change the behavior of adults. And so there's these embedded interventions, which I think if you don't take that relationship first approach, it's not going to be successful. And you'll feel frustrated as a consultant. You'll feel like you're not enough when really you haven't created an environment that really sets the occasion for successful consultation.
Mm-hmm. When it comes to like being an effective consultant, you mentioned certainly having that kind of rapport, being able to listen, knowing when to be directive versus collaborative. Do you find that these patterns, and again, not knowing all of your background, you may only have heard about some of these versus done them directly, but I'd love to hear your opinion. Do you find that the type of consultation you're going to use really varies based on the location? OBM consultation is almost always more directive because everyone's business-like. They just want to hear the answer versus school consultation, which, I've had a lot of experience with. And I would say, well, that's going to be way more on the collaborative side of if there is a gradient because, again, teachers don't have a lot of time. They really don't want you to just tell them what to do for whatever reason. I mean, do you find that consultation varies from place to place, or is it sort of more some universal principles and they tend to work everywhere?
Yeah, I wish it was saying, hey, there's universal principles. I think the only universal principles is if you take a problem-solving approach to the consultative work. But everything's contextualized based on, what are the outcomes that we're trying to achieve? Like you said, in business, we're paying you by the 15 minutes probably. So we have to be really efficient with our time. But in schools and in people's homes, they want to feel autonomy, that they're the local experts of their craft, whether it's parenting their child or educating their student. And so I think we can do a lot by recognizing that there's differentiated context. And if we're really trying to be awesome educators, the best thing we can do is differentiate how we're teaching, right? That's like the number one thing. So I think especially in schools or in spaces where you inherently have a power differential when you're working with someone, you have to try to break that down, and so that people feel comfortable. I do agree, though, in business settings, it's going to be a totally different context. And the most skilled consultants will know, how to differentiate.
Mm. Now, since most of the articles we're discussing today, well, 2 out of the 3 have to do with being in the school setting. Are there any sort of pro tips that you tend to give, especially maybe to students or to younger collaborators, when you're talking about starting to work in those settings that might be different than, say, working in the home?
Yeah. I think that's a really good question. When we're working in schools, I think the number one piece of feedback that we get is, what are you here for? What are you doing? How are you going to help me? And that's a really valid question, especially when you're stepping in someone's class. It's like going into their home. And so right off the bat, the most important thing that I always recommend to our graduate students is spend time in the classroom. Be helpful. Say, hey, I noticed you're busy. Can I go copy 10 papers for you real quick and bring that back? Oh yeah, thank you so much. That helped me out immensely. It's those micro moments of things that at least my students are always thinking, am I doing this right? Am I providing an intervention? Yes. You have to create that context first. And so I think that's super important to establish themselves in that way. And then when you start to make the recommendation or you say, hey, I noticed this thing that I keep seeing, everyone's more likely to take those things. So I think it's really critical in those settings to see some of those behaviors.
Mm-hmm. I definitely agree with that thought in terms of just finding those times like, hey, can I get that for you? Can I do this thing? And I know when I was younger, I was worried like, well, won't that make me look like I'm lesser or like I'm here to be the teacher's assistant, not the consultant. And it took me a while to recognize that like, no, that those little steps are so important for the collaboration. And, that was more my ego getting in the way, which, you get a lot of that when you first get out of school and you've spent a lot of money and taken your tests and everything. So
yeah, totally. And I think that there's this feeling that I think many people have where they're not enough. Like they want to make sure they can assert themselves and feel competent. And so I think the educators feel that way too, right? And when I've worked with educators in the past, the most difficult ones in my consultative practice, it's the ones who have had negative experience previous to me.
Yeah.
And I unfortunately inherit all of those experiences. And so I'm always trying my best to demystify those things and try to really start from scratch. Snacks help too. I like to bring donuts and things like that to try to, kick things off well, but it's really important. And I think that the most important thing is that we can value people for what they contribute. Yeah. Do they know everything about behavior analysis? Absolutely not. But that's why we're there, because if it wasn't for us knowing these things, then the schools would just be doing it already.
So, we're specifically talking about the idea of teleconsultation. So rather than being in the school, we kind of focused on just general consultation. Did you have a moment in your career where you kind of had that, there's got to be a better way, whether it was, being in Utah, you mentioned it's a huge landmass, it can be hard to get around, or was it something more mundane that you just got frustrated looking at your gas mileage and said, that's enough of this. Teleconsultation is the way to go?
It was kind of a mix. When I was in graduate school at Louisiana State University, we were working with schools that were about 45 minutes away in rural Louisiana. And I remember one morning going out, driving 45 minutes, and it was like, one lane road, very, very, very remote. And I get to the school and the teacher says, "Oh my goodness, I totally forgot about our meeting this morning. I can't meet."
No.
And it's 6:30 in the morning. And to get there, I had to wake up at 4:30 and, do all the things. And so I literally said, there must be a better way, right? How do we do this? And so that's when I, was talking to my grandparents on FaceTime or trying to dabble in that. And I was like, there is a better way. I have it right here. And so that really kicked everything off, was saying, I can't drive anymore to places and have people forget, because that's a real suck of my time. I mean, for all of us. And so really it was a selfish of just, how do I be more efficient with my time?
Thinking about that and sort of moving into it, what was teleconsultation like at the time? And I mean, what are sort of like the big ways that teleconsultation is available today?
So this was in 2012. And so it was really, very basic, at least to what we have now compared to Zoom and some of these other just amazing platforms. We had, single person to person connection, and it was choppy, the connection wasn't always so great, the quality wasn't so great, but it was the best we had. I think we've really, it's come such a long way. And I think if you map this out, probably those few years of the pandemic is when there was just such an increase in the technology features and just what we can do with it. I mean, the ability to collaborate now virtually is so much more amazing than when I first started, and exceeded my wildest imagination.
Do you ever feel bad for the people of Skype?
I do.
Just missed the window there.
I really feel bad of Skype. Yeah, because Skype, I remember Skyping with people.
Yeah.
And, right, when our friend moved to, she moved back to her country that wasn't here. And we were Skyping and it would continually, not work. And, right?
It was awful.
And then it just disbanded. I looked it up because I was like, whatever happened to Skype? Can you still Skype? You can't. It disbanded. And
They just shut it down.
They were before their time, though, right? If they come along 5 years later, they would have getting all those Zoom profits.
I think they were bought by Microsoft, so I don't think the creators of Skype are hurting for money. It's like, I could have been Zoom. They're like, hooray,
Skype.
I own an island now. Microsoft bought my company. I don't care what they do with them. They made Teams now. I don't know. Maybe they're still in the company. They're VPs
That's true.
or something.
Yeah, they're like, let's use your intellectual property. We'll make it a little bit better. You all just be okay with that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Isn't that everyone's tech dream to make amazing? You want to make amazing technology and have a giant company buy you out and then shut your product down, but you don't care because you're a millionaire. I thought that was the point.
Skype didn't close until 2021, so they just
I think
had
did they sunset it? They're like, why does Microsoft need two virtual conference platforms? Probably not.
They shut it completely off in 2021. So I mean, they could have been part of the pandemic, but they
It could have been a
They're on their way
contender.
out. Yeah.
Yeah.
too many glitches.
But
I
anyway, technology has advanced a lot.
It has. And when you're talking about Zoom, I think maybe one of my only regrets is I should have bought stock in Zoom when I first started doing this research, because it was like 2014. Zoom was nothing. And then,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it is so funny though, Aaron. I feel like, I'm in reading some of the papers that were written, sort of, they were getting prepared. Like I think even some of yours too, before they were getting prepared before the pandemic, and they're talking about all these different, HIPAA and FERPA compliant pieces of software, which Zoom was not at the time, I believe. And then all of a sudden, it's like boom, a switch. Suddenly, everyone just says Zoom. That's the only one they talk about anymore.
Yeah. Well, we did an episode on the ethics of teleconsultation kind of a while back. I feel like it was probably
before
in
2020.
2017, because it was episode
Oh, wow.
88. And a lot of it was, just kind of like in the hypothetical, like, what if you needed to do teleconsultation, right? And we covered a lot of the HIPAA and FERPA type of things. But personally, I had never really interacted with teleconsult at the time. But now,
Right. I think it was just an ambition, this like lofty idea we have, but
Yeah.
we immediately were all experts in it, for better or worse.
Yeah. And the meta-analysis here covers a lot of those same sort of ethical contingencies we have to ensure are in place, which I'm guessing we'll get to.
Yeah. Actually,
That's me, a paper towel.
Yes. Let's get there right now.
Okay.
Then. So, Aaron, you and King and all the other folks who kind of came up with that meta-analysis, were you just thinking there've been so many changes, there's so many opportunities for teleconsultation to thrive or to stall out? Let's just put it all together and kind of make a summary, or were there some kind of different goals in writing that paper?
Yeah, since we had been doing this work for almost 10 years, we had sort of this small window that we were really interested in, which was very, very much around intervention focus and training paraprofessionals, teacher support staff, educators. And we thought, there's with the pandemic and that context that provided so many people using it, we needed to know really what had been done so we could more effectively figure out what needs to be done. And so that was really the impetus for us on that, is for our own research, where should we go from there and from what we've done. And it really is such a under-researched area still, despite how much it's been used. So I'm hopeful that from some of the things that we found, other people are interested in pursuing things like asynchronous teleconsultation. Like up to this point, it's been just synchronous. And so we're very interested to explore that. And I don't think we would have really dived in as much if it wasn't for that review where we said, oh my goodness, everything is synchronous teleconsultation, but there's this whole other space that we could explore that we just hadn't yet.
Mm-hmm. So is there a sense from, the research, I'm seeing more and more, regarding asynchronous kind of teleconsultation or asynchronous, online training kinds of things, that it was just no one had thought of it at the time, or were there technological barriers that sort of kept it from becoming as popular as the sort of synchronous?
Yeah, I think that especially if you look at online education, asynchronous education just broadly kind of has this like stigma or like negative perception that you just like can't learn effectively, which is surprising because I think a lot of people get their degrees from online asynchronous education institutions. And so I think it's context. It's the delivery of the services. Is this high quality pedagogy, or is it really bad? I record my lesson and I'm just going to play it for an hour. And so I think it's figuring out really what it means to be asynchronous in teleconsultation, because I don't think it would be enough to just email them back and forth. Like that's not going to work. But at least what we're working on right now is trying to do like an asynchronous conversation where I record a video of me being like, hey, tell me a little bit about the problem that your student's experiencing. And then they can record back and say, oh, well, it looks like this, this, and this. And then we can have this dialogue just when it's convenient for us. And so I'm not sure we have the answers yet. Yeah, it's like texting. Yeah, I like that.
Video. Yeah.
Yeah, video texting each other. Yeah, and I think there's just like something more personal about that. And so at this point, we just like want to test the limits because like I mentioned earlier, there's just not enough of us to go around to support everyone. So we have to figure out these kind of replicatable, ways to get content out, whether it's videos or, virtual reality simulation training, whatever it may be.
Mm-hmm. Now, I think we talk a lot about all the, the pros, the things that are really exciting about teleconsultation and just really doing things, whether it's virtually, whether it's asynchronous, synchronous, kind of online video communication. Did you note any sort of like huge kind of negative themes or things that folks should really be very wary of in using teleconsultation?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of, I've talked really highly about it. And so, but there are really some things to consider, especially, if you're going to be in people's homes and if you're going to be recording content. So a lot of time when we're doing teleconsultation, we just observe in real time. So there's no permanent product, there's no recording. If we're coding data, it's in the moment. But if you start to store stuff, there's just such high probability of data breach. If you're going to store it somewhere, it has the probability that someone's going to try to hack it. Now, hopefully no one is targeting all of us, but I just plan for the worst when it comes to technology. And so knowing that, I really caution folks about what is the reason you need to have a recording of that. Is it because you are really trying to code it later or you're doing it for research? But for the most part, in real time, we know that that's going to be sufficient for the average behavior analyst who's maybe working in a school to try to consult. Doing that in real time is probably fine. So I would really caution that. The other piece that I think is really important is that there is still, despite everyone using technology, there's just various levels of proficiency and comfort still with being on camera and communicating in that way. And so as part of the relationship building, spending time to ask really direct questions about experience with technology and how people feel, so much like a social validity assessment about it, just to know, are there potential barriers on the front end and what can you do to try to demystify that? Oh, you're worried about this. Well, hey, have you thought about the virtual background so you don't have to see everything that's going on in the background? And there's little things like that that I think are not very challenging to implement, but can really result in more connection with the people you're trying to serve.
Do you want to be a BCBA?
Sure, we all do.
Now you can come to Regis College in Weston, Mass. to get your graduate degree.
Choose from any one of these courses.
Masters of Science in Applied Behavior Analysis.
Masters of Science in Special Education.
Dual degree in Special Ed and ABA.
Or be eligible for your postmaster's certificate.
You can complete your degree and be ready to sit for the exam in 2 years. And our 2017 grads had a 100% pass rate on the BACB exam.
Come enjoy practicum placement support, ethics mini handbooks, PhD-level professors, small class sizes, and a service trip to Iceland.
If interested, don't delay. Supplies are limited. Learn more at regiscollege.edu.
Again, that's www.regiscollege.edu, regiscollege.edu. One more time, www.regiscollege.edu. See you there!
Hey everybody, sorry to pause the conversation, but I want to remind our listeners that ABA Inside Track is ACE and QABA approved. By listening, you're able to earn 1 learning credit. All you need to do is go to our website, abainsidetrack.com/getceus, or you can click the link in your podcast player show notes, and that'll take you right to the page where you'll need to enter in some key information, including 2 secret code words. I'm going to give you the first one of those now. The first one is lemon, Lemon. It's a delightful citrus fruit, yellow in color, that is very sour, but you can add it to lots of things or make a drink out of it. Put it in water. It gives you a zing. But all you need to worry about is the fact that the code word is lemon. All right, let's get back to our discussion on teleconsultation. Hearing you kind of talk about some of those concerns there, and I know one that I feel like I saw a bunch during kind of a lot of the school shutdowns, but I never thought about it as sort of an actual barrier that might either need research or might need to be sort of reviewed in terms of looking at teleconsultation efficacy, would be how many students, especially like adolescent students, just like, nope, not getting on camera. I won't be. Yeah, I'm there. And, you could probably have, as a school psychologist, you could probably have a whole session with a student where they came on, you were like, I need to see you. And then they just checked out the whole time and you're just sort of talking into a void. And, why is that? Is it just this is the easiest way to escape? It's easier to escape than ever because you can pretend you're there and no one can know for sure.
That's right. Yeah. I think that there's definitely some unique challenges for online education. And I've partnered with some of our local online schools here in Utah, and they have up to 50% of students who are not logging on, which is really problematic. That's like 50% of students don't walk through the door. In response to that, we've continued to collaborate with the video games program on a Zoom scraper. So essentially, it's a tool that would be in the background of a Zoom classroom. And we're developing the avatar portion of it right now. So there's a digital person, and it texts you and says like, hey, like put us an emoji in if you thought that was cool. And so it's getting engagement from students in non-traditional ways. Because I think something that I've learned is if people don't have their camera on, there probably is a reason. And whether that's they're uncomfortable or they're disengaged, we have to create an environment that like sucks them in. And so I feel like I'm trying to like do the online dopamine hits to get people to like do stuff and try to stay engaged.
Mm-hmm.
And ideally this tool that we'll have will give educators feedback to know, okay, these students were all great. These 4, video off the whole time, no texting. That's the folks you need to call, talk to the parents, maybe say how much you really appreciate them being in class. So I think when it comes to doing, digital consultation or remote consultation, we have to be able to figure out ways to help make it useful for the parents or educators who might be doing these online spaces.
Mm-hmm.
I love that idea. I'm thinking about some Zoom classes that I had over the pandemic that were synchronous, and we require people to keep their cameras on. But even if their cameras are on, that doesn't mean that they're actually paying attention. They could be like shopping. People with glasses, I was like, I know what you're doing because I can see the reflection in your glasses.
Totally.
That's a very pretty dress. Do not buy it.
Yeah. It's true though. I mean, I think we need to be able to figure out, like people will understand the contingency and they'll say, okay, I'll just do that. So we have to figure out ways to really genuinely get them to be interested. We have a study that we're going to be submitting. It was a dissertation that one of our students, Emily Davis, worked on last year. And it was conjoint behavioral teleconsultation. So working with the family and the educator. And this was at an online school during the pandemic. And so it was educated at home. And really what we found to be the most effective was just getting kids out of their beds and having them sit in a chair and doing more of these antecedent strategies to really get them to engage. But parents were like, oh my goodness, this was, the most innovative thing we could have done. And so I think when you're close to these situations, it's so easy to get, distracted of what you need to do. And so I think we have still a lot to learn, but I'm excited to get that publication out.
Now, Aaron, in terms of any of the research you've done or your students or colleagues have done, has there ever been any concern of, well, I'm not there and my just being distant and just looking through a camera is not enough. I'm not able to capture the environment fully. Or is that something that it's really just a matter of, well, technology's gotten better. Here's a bunch of ways we can get over that concern.
Yeah, I feel like we're able to very effectively navigate within environments. So with the telepresence robots that we use, we can either drive those around environments or we have ones that are more stationary, but we can kind of turn them. So I think in that sense, it feels really, really comfortable. I do think, though, when we're thinking about trying to be, more in a space and thinking about problematic behavior, thinking about sort of more risk, that's where there's a real kind of steep limitation to using teleconsultation. And so, for example, when we're training educators and teacher support staff on functional analyses, we have a really strict termination criteria because if things go wrong, I can't just jump in like I would if they're at a clinic, right? I can't just hop in and be like, whoa. And so we're really trying to look at precursor behaviors. We're trying to set the environment up to the best possible so that we can try to avoid all the bad stuff from happening. Mm-hmm. One of the areas also that has brought up concern is related to our telehealth feeding work or feeding teleconsultation work, where there's clearly opportunities for choking or gagging on food. And so we were always concerned about not being in the physical space. And so we're doing a lot of assessment on the front end to cover ourselves and make sure we're doing this responsibly.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that brings us is a really good segue into the Bloomfield et al. Study. I know, and I saw the title, and we've done episodes on discussed feeding, and we've all worked with a number of folks who have done a ton of feeding research. It's not something that's our area of expertise, I think, for any of us. And the idea of feeding treatment from 45 minutes away just sounds like a really kind of a bad idea. It's just like so many things can go so very wrong. So what were a lot of assessment up front, but what were the big considerations that you put into play to say, yep, this is going to go great. It's going to be an awesome study that has the results that you got, which were amazing.
Yeah, we really were interested in trying to generalize feeding behaviors because I think when you talk about the feeding research in general, there's a lot of really effective interventions that we can see immediate results. The issue is the recidivism rate, especially for these more intensive outpatient clinics and inpatient clinics. So we were thinking, how can we create access to interventions that parents and caregivers can continue to use after our sessions are done? And so we figured, well, the best way to do that is to start to train them in the environment that they're going to try to do these things in the first place. And so rather than having them come into the clinic, rather than creating this contrived, really sort of inauthentic environment, we said, feed them where you feed them, and we will meet you where you feed them, meeting our clients where they're at. And so that was really the impetus. And we were really scared. We're like, all of our clients are going to choke on the first session. I'm going to get fired and go to jail. And that's the end of doing this research. And luckily, the IRB approved everything. We took, precautions on the front end, do like a true swallow evaluation just to make sure for all of our clients. And from that, we saw that as long as we were selecting individuals who didn't have that really high level of severity of feeding issues, more of your kind of run-of-the-mill picky eaters, that this was a really approachable intervention, particularly for caregivers and parents to implement.
Now, one of the things that I thought was so fascinating about the feeding study that we're talking about now was how it was so caregiver-led, and you could just really see it in the article. You could really read it between the text of like how much collaboration went into the procedure, developing the procedure, not just the nitty gritty pieces of the procedure, but all aspects of the procedure with the parent. And the parent had a number of legitimate concerns about, how am I going to do this? This is what feels comfortable to me. This isn't the procedure I want to do. I want to do this procedure. Was that just a process of just a lot of listening? Were there any moments where you weren't sure if it was all going to come together?
Yeah, I think with every research project, because it's so applied in nature, I'm always like, it's never going to work until it works at the end. And so we were very worried just in general. But this was a real highlight too. If you spend the time really listening to the person that you're trying to train and educate on these, you're going to understand nuanced issues that are going to come back around when you're implementing. And so the more we could really understand, oh, you're feeling uncomfortable because of this, or this is more of a context that helps you feel like it could actually work. If we're listening to those things, I mean, the parent is the local expert. And so I think we would be arrogant if we didn't, right? And so I really think all of that time on the front end was really helpful. I do say though that as part of applied research, we're always like, do we have to make a shift? And will this be the end of the study? But I think in all of my experience, as long as we're communicating with caregivers about our processes and our rationale and really trying to help them see it, we can always come to a compromise. Because at least what I've learned is our contingencies are really flexible. We just have to figure out what context to place them in.
So in that study, the parent had been diagnosed with autism themselves and, lived away, and it mentioned, I can't remember if it had an anxiety diagnosis that they had disclosed or just mentioned that they had high anxiety in certain conditions. So in some ways, it seemed like teleconsultation might have been one of the key factors to being interested in even following through, or not following through, but taking part in the procedure. The idea of going far away to a place where you're uncomfortable, doing something that is already very hard. You have a child who already has, feeding selectivity and ARFID. So that seemed like a huge pro that I honestly had never thought of when it came to teleconsultation. The idea that someone might actually love that modality for reasons, unrelated to what research says, their comfort level. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. And with this parent particularly, I don't, like you said, I don't think they would have participated in the study if we asked them to come to the clinic. I just don't think it would have happened. When we looked at some of the teletherapy literature years ago, what we found was folks who experienced anxiety found that telehealth in general was more acceptable, and they really preferred it. And so we were kind of banking on that same approach, that this will set the occasion for more engagement and make it more likely that they'll actually do these things. So yeah, I think that that's really important. And, I know I'm an anxious person myself, and I prefer to go see my own therapist through telehealth. So I think that there's real value in being in your most comfortable space and being vulnerable. So there's value to that.
I was actually just thinking about that. I was reading an article yesterday about how there is there's like a wait list and like a boom for mental health services after the pandemic. And they're like, it might not be the pandemic. It might actually be that now there's teleconsultation. And now people that wouldn't necessarily have accessed services are now trying to access services because they don't have to go places.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that's brings up another problem, which is the stigma towards just like getting services in general for all of this is people are like, I'm ready. And then we're like, oh, sorry, by the way, we can't actually serve you. So we have to figure that one out. I don't know how.
This is a step in the right direction, but yeah, the services, you need more services, even if you could do them online. It's tough.
I also think that the way in which this was structured, and very often, even if we're in home with families, we may be modeling the behavior and end up doing a lot of the procedures ourselves, right? In the guise of parent training. But in this case, that could not happen. It had to be that you were guiding the parent, and then the parent absolutely had to be the one to implement the procedures. And I don't know what the, outcomes of that look like as far as validity of the services, but I think that there could be a real bonus to having to provide services this way, and that the parent is really and truly empowered. Like, they did it. They 100% did it. And that's going to then allow them to tackle new other problems as they arise as well.
Yeah, and I think that's really important, because if the parents don't have that investment, then it's not going to generalize. And we really want them to feel the onus to be able to do those things.
I think I also appreciated in terms of having that, not necessarily being a part of the teleconsultation, or perhaps it was the number of procedures that were able to be shifted in the direction of the parent's preference. So the idea of training, it's mentioned kind of in the discussion that procedural integrity was a little bit variable at times, and that, the parent had asked not to be trained to mastery. Yeah, A, that's parenting. But B, the parent had asked not to be trained to mastery, which, again, as I read that, I'm of two minds. One is, it's so amazing that collaboration was able to occur. And then part of me saying, no, that's not how you do training. You train to mastery before generalization. Why? You can't do it that way.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that's where we had to, wrestle the ideas of, do we, do what we're supposed to do? Or do we say, this is going to be good enough because we have to continue to do these services? And so I think that's where, at least as I've done this work now for, 15 years or so, I've realized that the dogmatic idea of doing the intervention is aspirational, and it's more about really what's going to actually happen.
That definitely is very empowering, for me, in terms of not being so rigidly hewn to, no, this is how training works. I do a BST. It's got to be this certain way. You just want me to tell you about the procedure? Can I show you the research on how bad that is as a training methodology? Come on. It's okay to listen to your client and stakeholder, and to, okay, well, what do I have to do? How can I make it better, knowing that this may not be the result I want right away, or that anyone wants in terms of that training. So I appreciated that in the study, and how well it was described, and then sort of the pros and cons of that. But ultimately the pros, I think, to taking that approach. So thank you.
Yeah, you bet. I mean, I think we're always trying to shape people's behavior, especially adults. So it's just like those, little bits of time, as much as we can get. But yeah, I appreciate that, because I think if we don't have flexibility in our practice, it could, we'll get too wrapped up in what we're doing.
All right. So I want to make sure that we get time to talk robots, because John, a little earlier today was like, what's with these robots? What are those robots? What are these robots that keep describing? The telepresence robots. I don't understand that thing, which does sound very weird and futuristic, like a short circuit kind of thingamabob going through and doing your teleconsultation. So what are the kind of mobile telepresence robots of today? Like, what do they actually look like?
Yeah, well, I actually have one right here, so I can show you.
Oh, yes.
And so I'm sorry for the folks who are only listening, you don't get to see, but this is our double robot. Let me lift it up a little bit higher so you can see.
Look at that.
And it
looks
Segway.
like a Segway.
Yep.
With an iPad on top.
With an iPad on the top.
Yep. And it has, a great field of view.
Do you ever put a wig on it?
Not a wig, but actually one of the schools has a really fancy red bow tie for me. Oh. And so when I drive by, it's very official. I go through the halls and I'm like, hey, everyone.
That's pretty awesome.
It's a lot of fun.
So you control it. That's how it works?
You control it, exactly. So you think of it as an extension of you in this space. You drive it around with your arrow keys. So if you played video games, you're probably really good at driving it. And some of the newer ones they have more machine learning in the back end of it. And so you can click a spot and it just drives there. It does it all for you. But the ones that we have a little bit more practice. They're really fun. It's also really intimidating, because you get swarmed by kids when you drive through the hallways. And so you don't have hands and you can't be like, personal space, please. So there's those moments. I have so many just embarrassing stories, but it really is nice, especially being so far away. The schools that we work with are like 300 miles away. And so for me to just be able to say, hey, I'm going to drive down to that conference room and join the IEP meeting feels really good. But we also found that those aren't always as practical. And so that's where we have the Kubis, which are like the tabletop version. And you can kind of place it on a bookshelf and look around. Kubi is Japanese for neck. So it kind of embodies that.
Okay. So, and I know in sort of the overview, the kind of meta-analysis article, it was sort of it seemed like it was too early to tell a lot about the mobile telepresence robots. I think they got a couple sentences of like, this might be cool. Have you?
It is cool, but
Well, okay, it might be
Definitely
cool
cool.
in a research
definitely cool.
stance. Having
Cool.
a robot is always
Yeah.
cool.
I agree. Always cool, but like, is it practical? Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And I think that, I think the robots are practical. We have some districts up here who we've collaborated with, and since then they have their own fleet of 10 Kubies that they're in all of their special ed classrooms. And we have, one behavior analyst or one coordinator who's zooming into all of the different classrooms, and they don't have to drive anywhere. And so where it took, hours to see 4 different classrooms, now we can see 8 classrooms in one entire day.
Mm-hmm. And the whole time it's either there's a Kubi set up in some of those spaces, or it can be moved quickly, or the robot or the telepresence robot itself is just driving from place to place.
Yeah, and so we like to bring the double robots, the one that can drive around, into the spaces where, we have to drive around more. Typically, it's like secondary settings where students are more responsible, and we're not like, they're going to pick it up and try to throw it down or do something violent with it.
Our robot got beat up today. It was very sad.
There was one FA we were doing, and we had the double robot in there, and it was the very last session, and the students started to push it, and I was like, oh no, here we go. This is going to fall. This is going to be like, and it fell down, and
you're looking at the ceiling.
Yeah, I'm like, oh my goodness. Luckily, this was one where we were on site when it happened, because it was very early on, and I just didn't trust anything. So I said, we have to be here. So I run in. I'm like, oh my gosh, are you okay? And he's like, oh yeah, it was fine. So, me and the robot were just hanging out. And so that's when we realized that they're still very dangerous, and we have to be able to know the limitations. Yeah. And so for younger children, we put it up on a shelf, and it's just a little bit safer. For the older kids, they're less interested. You can't really do anything with it. You can't play games. You can't, go on any apps. Yeah. It's just my face talking to you.
Face.
Yeah.
So are these environments where you're sometimes there in person and sometimes?
Yeah, we have a mix. Typically what we'll do, at least with our programs that are in Southern Utah, is we'll start the school year. And we've been working with them for about 5 or 6 years. We'll go down, we'll connect with all the educators, we'll get consent for all of the services we're going to provide, meet with families and students. And then the rest of the year, it's all remote. Mm-hmm. And then as needed, we go back down. So if there's a high stakes IEP meeting, or if there's an important meeting that we have to attend in person, we'll go down. We'll also do some trainings. But for the most part, I would say 90% of the services are all provided remotely. And we have 4 classrooms that we've been supporting for those multiple years. And so, it helps that they know the drill. They're used to us. But if it's a new school, it takes some time, I think, to embed these robots, because there's a weird factor. People are like, this is the weirdest thing I've ever seen. And then they're like, and it's the coolest thing. And so it just takes some time to, I think, solidify the cool part.
Mm.
Yeah.
You're like Smarty at Stop and Shop.
Oh.
Right?
I want to push that thing over so bad when I see it.
They might not have Stop and Shop there.
Well, that's like a robot. A robot that goes around and cleans things.
This one will fall down on you, unfortunately. I think. I wish it was more stable. I wish it had more purpose. That's a good idea. We need to combine double with Roomba, and then it can clean the school while I'm teleconsulting. And now we're really getting good value.
Ooh.
Oh yeah, talk about the teachers be like, oh, I didn't have to clean up this mess as well as consulting with you. Like I value you immensely.
Forward, backward.
You're the best consultant I've ever worked with. This is great. Thank you, robot.
This is brilliant. Yeah, they're like, he comes in the classroom, he helps with the students, he cleans all the chips on the floor. It's a win-win.
Social validity just through the roof.
Amazing.
We need a new Likert scale. So good.
I've had situations where I did both Zoom and in-person consulting. And later on, when, my BT and I were reflecting on a particular observation, we wouldn't always remember whether I was there in person or via Zoom, which I think is a really good sign, actually, because it means that it feels just as real as being there if you're doing it right. So
I totally agree. And that's the piece, is that they're practically equivalent. And that's through the research that we've conducted, whether it be observations or just the work in general, it's practically the same. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Is it the same? No, it's not the same. Is it helpful to be able to experience people in the same space and have that presence? Absolutely. But if you don't have that, from an outcome standpoint, we can still get the same outcomes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Having one of those things where I could have been able to rotate my view would have been amazing. It didn't have that. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's a game changer. I mean, I think that's why we had to buy them, is because I would be trying to do observations and the kid would run across the screen, and then those got nothing to code for those. And so we were thinking,
and then you can hear something happening. You're like, I can't ask them to turn me right now because I think something involved is going on. So
can you engage in that behavior again, but do it in front of this camera, please? Yeah.
I know I find myself saying, man, I'm so glad my operational definition included a sound component so I can at least like score, like, hey, something happened. I heard something. It sounded
That's
like
brilliant. Yeah. I feel like, those are the lessons learned, is figure out all the ways to get data, not just what you can see.
Right.
Listen for the precursors that are loud. That's the one you want. So, Aaron, as of this recording, I would guess that it's coming or forthcoming, sort of some more directed research related to the mobile telepresence robots. But in terms of articles that we had to discuss today, we had the King et al. Study, the 2021 study, looking at the use of the drone versus video camera. And I got to admit, this did bring up one of the big costs that I always think of when I think of cool technologies, which is there are definitely some benefits. There may be some negatives that we won't know until we at least try it out. But then cost always coming up as the barrier, because I read the study. I thought it was a cool idea. I was like really excited. I was like, oh, I wish I'd been on that team. What a neat project to do. And then I started thinking, this is an expensive drone. Was this research, like, did someone on your team or one of your students say, listen, I bought this drone and I brought it home and my partner was so mad at me. Is there any way we can make this a research study so I can write it off of my taxes? Because, boy.
I feel like you're in my mind.
Yeah, we talked a lot about this, Aaron. This was like a topic of perseveration for multiple days, just so you know.
Oh my goodness. I feel like it was more, that conversation happened more with like my accounts manager, that were like, why do you need a drone? For years, I was like, I got to buy a drone. And selfishly, I didn't think it was practical. I still don't think it's very practical. I think it's like too prohibitive for the cost, but no one had observed human behavior through drones. And I thought that was weird, and someone needed to do that. So we can at least say that we can do that, and practically we get the same information. Right. I agree, though. Having big, giant, buzzing drones around children is not really going to always yield the best results. And so we really wanted to see from just a proof of concept. And I think what we were able to discern is, and I think you had put this in some of the info when we were talking before the show, is just get a really great position camera at like a 45-degree angle, and you got all that you need. I think we had lofty ideas that it was going to be amazing, and we could drive from school to school and observe recess to recess. And so, maybe, but I think really at the end of the day, I don't think people will use this. And this was one of the kind of selfish tech projects that we just like wanted to do so we could fly some drones.
That makes me happy for you to say.
Despite that, I appreciate your honesty on that, Aaron. You did cover for, hey, no one has done this type of study before. You did cover the questions that would need to be asked, which would be things like, what would be the benefits? Is it better point of view? Do you get more eyes on the student? Do you get better results? How loud is the drone? How much does the drone cost? When it came down to it, it did give a slightly better, improved view of the action of the playground play. So it was observing playground play, which again is a time that usually people say, oh, I want to observe, problem behavior occurs on the playground. And I go, could it occur somewhere else? Because playgrounds are really hard to see. The kids go hide somewhere every time. And then it's like 30 minutes of me just trying to find them. And there's no way, reactivity is going to set in after, the guy's like climbing up the slide, the 50th time. So it was really good that you had that.
Are you the guy who's climbing up the slide?
Usually it's because I'm doing an observation. Sometimes just because it's fun.
Okay.
You thought about the sound? How loud is this thing? Because if it sounds like a Mack truck, the children will just stop playing to stare at this terrifying thing. I think the battery life was really where it hurt. You only got about 20 minutes. And if it was too windy, you got to bring it down and charge it again. That did seem like a huge limiting factor there.
Only 5-minute observations, though.
Because, on average, they were 5-minute observations because the thing got blown down a couple times.
That's right. We almost crashed into like brick walls and stuff. Yeah. Oh, no. And that's where like, we started this study. We have to finish it, but we probably shouldn't recommend this to anyone.
But you did it.
And
now we know. Yeah. Research tells us that drones, maybe not so great for doing better observation. You just set your camera up a little more mindfully and you're probably okay. Because that thing could run for hours.
Exactly. And I think those are really important questions to ask, because I think what we see is like bad stuff come out. And so I wanted to debunk things that we also shouldn't do, right? So if we're doing VR work, if VR, and at the end of the day, people are like, this is terrible, and I feel like I've learned less, then we shouldn't pursue that. And so sometimes I think we have to like ask those questions to know when not to ask anymore.
Spoken like a true scientist.
Right.
Well, that's the fun part about doing research that maybe not as many people are into, or you got in on the ground floor, is that you can ask the questions that turn out to be, wow, what a giant expenditure of money for a cool piece of technology that ended up being not something I'd recommend in the future. But hey, no one else did it. Somebody had to ask the question and somebody had to answer it. So awesome.
Yeah, thanks for allowing our team to do that. we still fly the drone, so I promise it's getting good use. And a lot of the kids we work with in our schools, it's like the best reward. We get to fly the drone. So there is that value. So maybe on a more interpersonal level, but yeah, not so much collecting data.
Yeah. So, I mean, one question I did have in terms of like the ongoing technology, I mean, is drone technology to do the things you'd want to do? So maybe having more control of the camera, because that did seem to be a bit of a limitation in the studies that you couldn't, I don't think you could control the camera, but I know like certain drones, don't they have more ability to say like zoom in or change the, you move to like a widescreen lens, anything like that? Or am I just watching too many movies?
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, the technology just gets better and better every year. And so even like the one we used was like a DJI Phantom, which is like I don't know, I'm thinking the size, it's pretty big. It's bigger than a basketball. And then the one that we have now is the really teeny one that's like the size of a phone. And so I think as the technology gets more robust and we can kind of have longer flight time, we can adjust the cameras. Maybe we can fly higher so they can't hear the sound, but zoom in to see stuff. There may be value. I'm still interested in asking those questions, but I think practically, the well-positioned camera that you can move around is probably going to do the trick.
Yeah. I mean, certainly I think for something, maybe if you're coding something that was not, necessarily problem behavior, you were just trying to sort of do like more general coding of like percentage of play time, it's things that are a little more neutral in terms of, the good information, but isn't, there's no danger to the student. I mean, especially with like a good software package, I'm wondering, could you do the drone and it captures enough and they're able to identify, the face through facial recognition software to sort of, okay, I can track them and then boom, do my math for me, computer, and then give me my percentages. I know we talked about some barriers earlier in terms of, do we have to record these things? But that maybe that could be something to look into. That's sort of speeding up some of that work, the human man hours or the human hours.
Exactly. I mean, I think that's what the technology should do, right? Make things more efficient.
I was thinking too when I was reading the drone study about covert behavior, right? So behavior that we haven't been able to capture, a drone might be helpful with that, because we can get to places that students may not be engaging in the behaviors when the person is around. But you could also do that with camera too, but maybe it would be more widespread with a drone.
Like if you know the place the kids always smoke.
Right?
You mean?
If they know they're smoking, or like when they poop behind the couch, like those types of things.
So now I'm imagining the telepresence robot just kind of like sneaking up.
Are you pooping behind the couch?
No, robot, go away. I see you.
Then then you start getting robot reactivity. They're like, no, I'm not.
Yeah, well, and we get robot reactivity just in general. I mean, I think part of the work, what we found too, is like we just kind of put the devices in there and let kids just interact with it. They're like, oh, poking it, like it's this like foreign object, and like what's it going to do? But that's really important, because I think we all are uncertain about the things that aren't familiar to us.
I'm sort of wondering, as I think about, when I hear robots, I'm always thinking of, like the movie AI or, Terminator. I'm thinking about like humanoid robots. And I'm sort of wondering, like, at some point, wouldn't we want our telepresence robots to look like humans? And I'm like, you know what? No, I think everyone would like them to just be a stick with an iPad on top. Because the idea of like, I am a robot, I'm coming to film you. Like, I don't know. No, thank you. No consultation today, please.
Yeah, right. It's true. I mean, there's the piece, the uncanny valley of like not making it too human looking like. And so that's really important. I mean, I do wish that the robot I showed you all had some hands or some clamps or something, because it'd be nice to open doors. Right now, the only way I can open a door is like raise the thing up and down until the teacher sees me or text them. It's awkward, but we need more. I do think there's some really cool stuff with like humanoid type robots, like Ellie Kazemi's work. They've been doing stuff around training. And so I think that there's some really cool stuff we'll see with programmable robots and humanoid robots. But yeah, I mean, the robot walking in and being like, I'm going to help you with your kids that feels not so good.
So, Aaron, I think this is a good point for us to move into the last section of our show, the dissemination station, where we talk to practitioners about what are some of like the big take-home messages that they can use kind of immediately in looking at this research.
I would recommend that folks who are interested in doing this feel brave to play around a little bit with some of the technology and really immerse themselves in really what's available. There's so much, and it can really enhance your practice. I think at times through teleconsultation, I can do more than I could even in person, from like a sharing of information digitally, things like that. So I'd encourage people to do that. I'd also, tell people that if they're considering to do this work, to get some professional learning around this, go to conferences, try to really hone in on your craft and try to make sure that you're doing this work that really aligns with your values as a behavior analyst and as a consultant. Yeah, I think those are probably the two big ones.
Okay. Are there any pitfalls that either you learned the hard way or from somebody else in terms of things that can go very wrong with teleconsultation? Not so much in terms of the technology piece, which you sort of already talked about, but in terms of as the consultant acting in a way that you wouldn't have done in person, but for some reason just seems to happen more with teleconsultation?
Yeah, I think when you're remote, it's very easy to be disengaged and to not have that connection and that presence. So I think if you're doing teleconsultation, really leaning into those opportunities to talk and to send text messages and really, really intentionally do that work. Because if not, then you're not present in their minds. And so you kind of always have to pop up being there, whether it's a text or an email or something.
All right. Well, Dr. Aaron Fischer, thank you so much for coming on the show today. It was a real pleasure to talk technology and consultation and to sort of get a glimpse into the future of what teleconsultation has to offer. If folks are interested in reaching out and kind of asking any sort of like tech questions, or if you have any like robot recommendations for them, is there a place that they can contact you?
Yeah, I would love that. I'm always happy to geek out and talk about technology and doing this work. The best place to email me is Aaron.Fischer@utah.edu, or you can go on our lab website, u-ttec.com.
Thanks once again to Dr. Aaron Fischer for coming on the show. It was a lot of fun getting the chance to talk all about technology and consultation and how you put them together to make something that is seemingly kind of magical these days. I'm sure many of you listeners out there would agree. Hopefully you've had good experiences with consultation, teleconsultation especially. But, please let us know your own experiences. We'd love to hear from you. You can do that a lot of different ways. You can email us at abainsidetrack@gmail.com, or you can post on any of our social media pages. What has teleconsultation done for you? What are the lessons you've learned from it? We would love to hear that. We really hope you enjoyed listening to the podcast. Please rate and subscribe to the show on any of your favorite podcast players. You can also find these posting on YouTube with the YouTube subtitling feature. And if you want more ABA Inside content, plus all of these episodes a week ahead of time and some discounts at our CE store, please think about joining us on Patreon, patreon.com/ABA Inside Track, where you can get access to, like I said, everything a week ahead of time, bonuses at the CE store, a chance to vote on some of our episodes coming up, and to listen to our quarterly book clubs and get 2 free CEs for doing so. We recently came out with an episode for everyone on supervision, reading the book Crucial Conversations. Before that, we did a whole read on the book on equity in data collection called Street Data. We hope you will enjoy listening to those. They're only available, or some of them are only available for our Patreon subscribers at patreon.com/ABA Inside Track. And finally, our second secret code word is green, Green. Like the color. It's not easy being green. Some final thanks. Big thanks to Dr. Jim Carr for recording our intro and outro music, Kyle Sturry for our interstitial music, and Dan Thabit of the Podcast Doctors for his amazing editing work. We'll be back next week with another fun-filled episode, but until then, keep responding. Bye!